During World War II, the North American P-51 Mustang became one of the most famous fighter planes ever built, a machine that changed the balance of air power and helped the Allies dominate the skies over Europe. Yet few people know that one of the most valuable lessons about its design came when a P-51 was captured and carefully examined by German engineers. This story, though rarely told in full, is true and reveals how both sides of the war constantly studied each other's technology to gain any possible advantage. When the Germans finally got their hands on a flyable Mustang, they were both impressed and puzzled. They had expected to find some secret mechanism or hidden innovation that made the aircraft so powerful and fast. Instead, what they discovered shocked them in a very different way. It was not the complexity of the Mustang that stunned them, but its simplicity, efficiency, and practicality. The Germans captured a P-51B model in early 1944 after it made a forced landing in relatively good condition. It had run low on fuel after a long-range escort mission and was forced down in a field in France, which at that time was still under German control. The Luftwaffe immediately took the plane for examination, knowing that this was the fighter that had started to challenge their once dominant Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fw-190s. The captured plane was transported to the Rechlin test center in Germany, where engineers and test pilots conducted evaluations on captured Allied aircraft. The first thing they noticed was the exceptional build quality. The Mustang was light, but extremely well put together, with clean lines and aerodynamic refinement that reduced drag to an absolute minimum. They realized quickly that the plane's performance came not from some hidden gadget, but from careful engineering choices and attention to every small detail. When German mechanics began taking apart the Mustang's engine and systems, they were surprised by how straightforward everything was. The Allison engines used in earlier Mustangs had already been known to them, but this version was powered by the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same basic design as the British Spitfire's Merlin, but modified and mass-produced in the United States. The Germans already respected the Merlin engine, but what stunned them was how efficiently the Americans had managed to produce it in massive quantities while keeping the reliability so high. The engine ran smoothly and offered an excellent balance of power, altitude performance, and durability. The Luftwaffe's own high-performance engines, like the Daimler-Benz DB605 or the Junkers Jumo 213, were technically advanced, but more delicate and difficult to maintain in the field. The German engineers realized that while they had focused on ultimate performance, the Americans had built something that could be flown every day, maintained by average mechanics, and still perform brilliantly. Another surprise came from the Mustang's laminar flow wing design. The Germans examined its cross-section and realized that it was designed to reduce drag dramatically at high speeds. The Luftwaffe engineers had experimented with advanced wing profiles as well, but the Americans had succeeded in mass-producing a design that combined stability, efficiency, and strength. The wing allowed the Mustang to fly farther and faster than most fighters of the era while carrying extra fuel. The engineers tested the plane in flight and found that its control harmony, how the stick and rudder responded, was near perfect. The Mustang felt smooth and balanced, even at high speeds or when diving. Test pilot Hans-Werner Lersch, who flew the captured aircraft, wrote that it was one of the most pleasant and well-mannered fighters he had ever flown. He noted that it combined the maneuverability of lighter fighters with the range of a bomber escort, something few German planes could achieve. The Mustang's cockpit also impressed the examiners. It was simple, clear, and designed with the pilot in mind. Instruments were easy to read, and the controls were positioned logically. In German aircraft, while the engineering was often brilliant, cockpits could be cluttered and required more pilot attention. The P-51's layout showed the American emphasis on ergonomics, making the pilot's job easier so he could focus on fighting, not managing the airplane. This detail, small as it may seem, made a big difference in combat. The Germans noted that this reflected a larger truth about American aircraft production.
Design decisions were made not by tradition or by what engineers thought was elegant, but by what worked best in combat and in mass production. When they examined the structure and materials, they noticed another key difference. The Americans had used modern manufacturing methods and alloys that allowed strength without excess weight. Rivets were flush with the skin, reducing drag and giving the plane its sleek look. German planes, while robust, often had rougher finishes because of wartime resource shortages and the focus on producing aircraft quickly. The Mustang looked and felt like a machine made with care and precision, even though thousands were being built every month. The German engineers concluded that this was perhaps the greatest strength of the Mustang, not that it was individually superior in every respect, but that the Americans could build thousands of them quickly, each one nearly identical in performance and reliability. This consistency was something the Luftwaffe increasingly lacked by 1944.
When the Germans began flying the captured Mustang in test combat against their own aircraft, they were startled by how formidable it was. The P-51B was able to match or exceed the speed of the FW-190A and could outturn the Bf-109G at certain speeds. Its climb rate was competitive, and its range was far superior. The long-range tanks attached under the wings allowed it to escort bombers deep into German territory, something that had previously been impossible for Allied fighters. The Luftwaffe had always counted on the fact that Allied bombers would eventually fly without fighter cover, making them easy targets. But with the arrival of the Mustang, that strategy collapsed. German pilots who flew the captured P-51 realized that it was perfectly suited for the kind of warfare that was now unfolding. High-altitude, long-distance battles over Europe, where range and endurance mattered as much as pure agility. What stunned the engineers the most, however, was how the P-51 represented the complete integration of design, engine, and purpose. It was not a machine built to showcase a single breakthrough. It was a fighter born from teamwork between engineers, pilots, and manufacturers. The Mustang's original design came from a British request, and it combined British aerodynamics, American manufacturing, and a British engine built under license in the US. It symbolized Allied cooperation at its finest. The Germans, by contrast, were working in isolation by that stage of the war. Their brilliant minds, such as those who designed the Me-262 jet or the FW-190D, were producing incredible machines, but in limited numbers and often without sufficient fuel or materials. The P-51 represented not just an airplane, but an entire industrial philosophy that Germany could no longer match. As the war went on, the captured P-51 continued to be tested by the Luftwaffe for tactical research. They used the data to train their pilots on how to identify and fight against Mustangs. Manuals were even distributed with diagrams showing how the P-51 looked from different angles and what its strengths and weaknesses were. But even with this knowledge, German pilots found it increasingly hard to win encounters. The P-51 could appear suddenly, engage quickly, and break away without losing energy. It could fly farther, faster, and higher than most of their aircraft. The Luftwaffe test results made it clear that unless a German pilot caught the Mustang by surprise, he was at a serious disadvantage. After the war, when Allied engineers studied German aircraft and records, they discovered just how closely the Germans had examined the P-51. In their reports, German engineers described it as a near-perfect compromise of design priorities: speed, agility, range, durability, and ease of production. They admitted that their own aircraft sometimes exceeded the Mustang in specific areas, but none could match its overall balance. They were particularly struck by how the Americans managed to mass-produce such a machine without sacrificing performance. For Germany, where resources were dwindling and factories were under constant bombing, this seemed almost impossible. The Mustang was proof of what an organized industrial effort could achieve when guided by practical, results-oriented thinking. The story of the captured P-51 did not end with the war. Decades later, aviation historians and restorers found the records from Rechlin and other Luftwaffe test centers confirming that the Germans had indeed flown and analyzed the Mustang in depth. Some of the test reports survived, detailing performance comparisons and pilot impressions.
The captured Mustang itself was eventually destroyed during the war, possibly lost in an air raid or scrapped as resources grew scarce. But its legacy lived on, not only in the memory of those who tested it, but also in the lessons it taught. For the German engineers, it was a humbling experience. They realized that the Americans had mastered the art of combining simplicity and performance, something Germany's over-engineered approach often failed to do. From a modern perspective, this episode highlights how the P-51 Mustang wasn't a miracle plane by accident. It was the result of collaboration, smart design choices, and an understanding that war demanded reliability as much as innovation. When German engineers took apart that captured Mustang, they expected to find hidden secrets of technology, but what they found instead was the power of good engineering, efficient, logical, and scalable. The beauty of the Mustang lay not in exotic materials or mysterious devices, but in its perfect balance of every essential feature. It was fast enough to fight, light enough to maneuver, strong enough to survive, and simple enough to build by the thousands. That was what stunned the German engineers most of all. The truth of the story has been confirmed by wartime reports and post-war interviews with both Allied and German pilots. The Mustang's impact on the war was enormous. It allowed bombers to reach deep into Germany and return safely. It crippled the Luftwaffe's ability to defend its homeland and laid the way for the Allied invasion of Europe. The captured P-51, examined by German experts, became a symbol of the turning tide, a reminder that by 1944, the technological and industrial advantage had shifted irreversibly to the Allies. In the skies over Europe, the Mustang became not just a fighter, but the embodiment of what efficient design and teamwork could achieve in wartime. In the end, when German engineers examined that captured P-51, they were not just looking at an enemy aircraft, they were looking at the future. It was an airplane that combined the lessons of every previous generation of fighters into one near-perfect design. It showed them what was possible when innovation served practicality and when engineering brilliance was guided by purpose. And though they may have been stunned, perhaps even disheartened by what they found, they also learned from it. The captured Mustang demonstrated that the secret to superiority in the air was not mystery or magic, but clarity, simplicity, and execution. Those lessons would echo long after the war ended, influencing aircraft design around the world for decades to come.